Hello, I'm going to tell you the story of Rumplestiltskin. It's a traditional story that was written a long time ago by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time there lived a miller. He was a very poor miller. He didn't feel very important, although his job was quite an important one because he had to grind the corn to make flour so that the townspeople could make bread. To make himself feel more important, he used to tell stories about his beautiful daughter, who he loved very much. And he told stories that were really not very believable about how amazing she was and what wonderful things she could do. And this made him feel more important because people used to listen to his stories. One day he was telling a story about his daughter, about how she was so fantastic that she could spin straw from the fields, everyday straw, into gold on a spinning wheel. Of course, nobody really believed him, except there was somebody in the crowd who did. It was one of the king's servants. And he crept back to the palace and he went straight to the king. And he said to the king, I've heard this story about a girl in the village, the miller's daughter, who can spin straw into gold. The king said, have her brought to me. If anybody's going to have gold made from straw in this land, it's going to be me. I'm the king. And so the girl was brought to him. And he took her to a room and he opened the door. And the room was full of straw, and in the middle of the floor was a spinning wheel. And he said, your father says that you can spin straw into gold. If it's not true, and you haven't spun all this straw into gold by the morning, you will die. The girl, oh no, I don't tell him that my father tells lies and that it's not true. I can't do it because that would have got her father into trouble. So she said nothing. The door banged shut, the key was turned in the lock, and she sat down and began to cry. Oh no, what am I going to do, Father? What have you done? You've told a ridiculous lie. Nobody can spin straw into gold. It's not possible. Oh no, what am I going to do? I'm just going to sit here till morning. There's nobody to help me. I'm all on my own. Oh no. She heard her voice. I'll help you. She looked round, and there next to her was a little man with his hands on his hips. I'll help you. I've said I'll help you, but it'll cost you. The girl said, but I'm poor. I haven't got anything to give you. My father's poor. Please help me. I'll do anything you say. I'll do anything I can. And the little man said, I like the look of that necklace you're wearing. I'll have that. The girl remembered a necklace that her father had bought her. She loved it very much, but it was more important that she survived. So she took the necklace and gave it to the little man, who snatched it off her and put it in his pocket. He sat down and immediately began to spin. The girl was so tired, it had been such a traumatic day, she fell straight asleep. When she woke up early the next morning, she was shocked to find the man had gone. She was on her own in the room with the spinning wheel. But as she looked around, she realised that the huge pile of straw had gone, and in its place was a pile of gold. She was just taking all this in when the door flung open, and there was the king. So it's true, you can spin gold from straw. The girl said, yes, please, can I go home now? I've done this for you. My father will be worried about me. Can I go now? Oh, no, said the greedy king. Oh, no, there's one more room of straw I want you to do before you go. And he took her up the staircase to a different room, opened the door. It was a bigger room, a bigger pile of straw. He had the spinning wheel brought in and placed in front of her. And he said, spin this into gold by morning or you will die. And he banged the door and he turned the key. And the girl was on her own again. Oh no, she said, what am I going to do now? I can't be so lucky as to have that man come and help me again. And anyway, he won't know where I am. And I've got nothing to give him. So that's it. Oh no, what am I going to do? She heard the voice. I'll help you. Who says I won't help you again? I'm here, aren't I? She said, but I've got nothing to give you. I gave you my necklace yesterday and you want me to pay you and I can't pay you. And he said, I like the look of that ring you're wearing. She remembered a ring. She had got a ring that her father had given her. Again, she didn't want to part with it, but it was most important that she should survive until morning. So she gave him the ring and sat down and watched, and he began to spin. She fell asleep. When she woke up the next morning, he'd gone again. And as she looked round, she saw the straw had also gone, but in its place was a bigger pile of gold. She waited, and eventually the door flung open and in came the king. And she said, see, I've done it. That's the second pile of gold for you. Can I go home now, please? My father will be very worried about me. Please, can I go home? No, said the king. Remember, he was very greedy. No, you're going to stay and do one more room. But this time, if you do the room, I will let you marry my son, who will be coming tomorrow from his journey across the seas. And I will allow you to marry him. Because the king had decided, although she was only a poor miller's daughter, she was going to be very rich if she could keep making all this gold, and so he wanted her close by him. So he took her up to a different room, opened the door. It was an even bigger room with an even bigger pile of straw. In came the servant with the spinning wheel, put it down, the door banged shut, the key was turned in the lock, and she was on her own again. And this time she was beside herself because she'd given away all her jewellery. How could she even pay the little man even if he came back? And she began to sob. And she sobbed and sobbed, and suddenly she heard the voice again. What are you crying for? You know I'll help you. She looked round, and there he was again. But she said, I've got nothing to give you. I've given you all my jewellery. We're a very poor family. My father's got nothing. I can't pay you. He said, oh, we'll sort that out later. And she said, well, I've got nothing to give you. I'll spin the straw into gold, and we'll sort it out later. And he sat down and began to spin, and the girl fell asleep. When she woke up the next morning, he was still there. And she said, oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. There was this lovely big pile of gold. Oh, how can I ever repay you? And he said, you can repay me by giving me your child, your firstborn child, when you have a child. And she said, but I haven't got a child. I'm not going to have a child. And he said, yes, you will. You'll marry the prince and you'll have a child. And when you have that child, you're going to give him to me. And she said, but we never agreed that. That wasn't what we agreed. You didn't tell me that before you spun the gold. He said, it's too late, and I'm off. And he disappeared, and she was left. The door opened. This time it wasn't the king. It was the prince, returned from his travels across the seas. And he said, I'm really sorry. I cannot believe my father has done this to you. I'm so sorry that you've been locked up all this time. And of course, you don't have to marry me. I will find a way to make my father let you go. And he sat down to talk. And they found that they had a lot in common, and they really liked each other. And they talked all night. Eventually, the girl and the prince married. And a year later or so, they had a baby. And so much time had passed that the girl had completely forgotten about the strange little man and the promise he'd taken from her about the baby. Until one day she was sitting in the chair, rocking the baby, when she heard a voice, I've come to take the child. She looked around, and there was the little man. She was terrified. No, you can't take the child. No, he's mine. I didn't promise that. Yes, you did. I spun all that gold for you, and that was the price we agreed. She said, I'll give you anything. I'm very rich now. I can give you jewels, give you a castle. You can have anything you want. Just say, and I'll give it to you. He said, I don't want any of those things. I want something that's worth more than all of those things. I want the child. The queen was so upset that the little man took pity on her. And he said, okay. I'll give you 3 days. 3 days to guess my name. And if by that time you haven't guessed my name, I'm taking the child. So the queen sat up all night trying to think of names that were unusual, because she knew it wouldn't be an ordinary name. So she sent a message throughout the land to see what names could be thought of. And the next day, when the little man came, she said, I think I've got your name. I think I know what it is. It's got to be one of these. Could it be Casper or Melchior or Balzar? What, any of those any good? And she rolled off a big long list. And the little man was dancing with joy. And he said, no, I knew you'd never guess it. Ha, ha, ha. No, you'll never guess it. You've got 2 more days. And he disappeared. Now the queen was really beginning to panic, because what was she going to do? He's going to come back, and she hadn't got a clue what name he could have. So she sent out messengers again. They went all over the land, and they came back with a list of names. So that night, when the little man arrived, what have you chosen? Have you found my name? I bet you haven't guessed it, have you? She said, well, I think I have. It's one of these, isn't it? And she went through the list. And she said, is it sheepshanks or peg leg or skinny ribs? Could it be any of those? She had a big long list. No. Ha, ha, ha. You'll never guess it. You'll never guess my name. Ha, ha, ha. But you've got 1 more day, and then I'm going to come and take the child. So he turned up the next day, and the queen had, before he turned up, the queen had gone for a walk. She didn't know what to do. She'd walked for hours and hours and hours trying to think of a name. Eventually she came into the woods and she heard someone singing. And she walked over to follow the sound of the singing, and she saw a little glow of a fire. So she walked up to the fire, hid in the bushes and looked, and there was this little skinny man dancing around the fire singing, "Today I'll bake, tomorrow I'll brew, the next I'll fetch the Queen's new child. Still no one knows, it's just the same, that Rumplestiltskin is my name." And the Queen thought. She crept away back to the castle. And that night, when the little man arrived, he said, well, have you guessed it? Have you guessed it? And the Queen said, is it John? No, you'll never guess it. Is it David? No, told you you'd never guess it, you'd never guess it. Ha, ha, ha. One more go. If you don't guess it this time, I'm taking that child. So she said, oh, well, I've only got one left. Could it possibly be Rumplestiltskin? The little man was furious. How could anybody know his name? How had she found out? How did you find out? How did you find out? And he jumped up and down. He bounced up and down on the spot. He was so angry. He made a hole in the floor and he disappeared down into the hole. And he was never seen again. And the Queen and her husband and the child lived happily ever after.